This morning I went to a native plant sale in my area and I felt inspired to talk a little bit about the difference between native plants and invasive plants, as well as the opportunities that native plants bring to your garden. So whether it's a cutting garden or your landscaping, and whatever that looks like for you, native plants can give you such lovely color and opportunities that some other plants can't. Every plant starts out as some kind of native plant somewhere, and then cultivars are bred selectively to create features that a grower or a home gardener is interested in. So for example, a native tree in my area is a witch hazel. It's a vernal witch hazel tree, but there are also other cultivars of witch hazel that are not native to my area that have been bred selectively for different traits, and they have their own special name. A lot of natives are called common, whatever the plant is, or wild, whatever the plant is. For example, a common witch hazel or a wild phlox, something like that. The difference between natives and invasives is that native plants have natural competition in their home environment. So they have insects that eat them, they have bugs that forage in them, they have animals that make their home in their branches or in their leaves, and this is part of a natural ecosystem and balance in your garden, and also in nature, in the forest, in prairies. There are native plants that are home to native animals and insects, and it's part of the ecosystem that the plants get eaten, but not too much as a food source for native things, and they just kind of casually spread, not in a way that makes it difficult to get rid of them, but they just kind of meander along roadsides and things like that. Sometimes when people are trying to garden naturally or organically or without pesticides, they will call in insects to do the work for them. But it's important to note that there are insects that are native to your region, and if you plant native plants, that will bring the insects to your garden. You don't need to buy them, you don't need to source them somewhere else. If you have a food source or flowers or leaves that the native insects, birds, and animals like, then they will naturally come to your garden and be your pest protectors for you. So for example, there are native ladybugs and non-native ladybugs. I am not interested in bringing in non-native ladybugs to eat aphids when I could just attract native ladybugs to do the work for me and help me with my aphids. So it's important to note that some insects that are native to our area will eat native plants because that is their food source. That is how the ecosystem works. And it's okay with me if some of my plants are munched on by caterpillars, by aphids, by things like that, as long as the ecosystem is in balance. The area where there becomes a concern is with non-native insects and plants who don't have competition for resources. So for example, there are non-native insects like Japanese beetles, and none of the native birds in my area eat those beetles. There's nothing that fights against them. And because of that, they get overrun. They're extremely overpopulated in our area and much of North America, and they're very damaging to plants, both native and non-native plants that are brought in for landscaping and gardening. People try to combat this by spraying insecticides and things like that on their garden, but that's not fixing the problem. So my goal is to host as many beneficial and native insects, birds, and animals as I can in my garden so that it is its own oasis that is in balance. It's important to me that I'm not bringing on invasive plants to my area because I know that they will compete with my native plants and choke them out as they fight for resources. So there are a lot of plants that are in my area that spread rampantly because they were brought from somewhere else, and this is true in any area. You'll see plants on the side of the road that are just choking out everything else, and it seems that they have no competition because they don't. The area that they're from has plants and animals and insects and things that compete with them for resources or even eat them to hold them into balance, to keep them back from spreading so rampantly. But when they are introduced to a place that they're not local to, sometimes things can take control, like kudzu vine that is all throughout the south of the United States. So I am not someone who only gardens with native plants, but I am hoping to boost my native plant options so that I have more native animals, insects, and birds coming into my garden to help maintain the balance with insects and to keep weeds and other things I don't want out. So it's important to note that a weed is something that is planted where you don't want it to be, but every plant is local somewhere. So for example, ranunculus that I grow here in the States, in Northwest Arkansas, that are a beautiful cut flower, they're native to Mexico. So they grow on their own in Mexico. In the same way, there are beautiful flowers and bushes and trees that are native to my area, and I can use their beauty in my garden while attracting and giving habitat to native things. So for example, today I purchased a witch hazel. I purchased the vernal witch hazel that is native in my area. It has beautiful yellow stringy blooms in the winter before it gets leaves. It can be used medicinally and in beauty products and things like that. It smells great. I'm super excited to have added that to my garden. Another thing that I got was a native plum. It's the American plum. It's native to my area. This one has gorgeous white blooms in the spring, and then it does produce fruit as well for the birds. And it is not as heavy producing as a plum tree that has been bred for its fruit, but because it's native in my area, the beneficial insects, pollinators, and birds will love it. The next thing that I got is a golden currant bush, and I'm really excited about the berries on these for forage for birds and other wildlife, and they're also just really, really beautiful. Next up, I got a 9-bark bush, and these again have many varieties that are not native to my area, but we do have 9-bark growing natively in the wild here in Northwest Arkansas. So I got a native 9-bark bush. I'm excited to use that as a cut foliage for filler, and then they also have lovely blooms that can be used in arrangements as well. This is one that I've had on my list, and I was excited to find one that actually is native in my area so that I can boost my native insect population while having a plant that's great for cutting. The last thing that I got today is a cross vine, and I'm hoping to just let this ramble and grow up the side of my house. They get up to 50 feet long, and they have the most gorgeous cup-shaped blooms, and I'm really excited to add that to my space. Some of the other native plants that I'm already growing, I've started some from seed. I started yarrow. Colorado yarrow is native in my area and also Colorado and much of the United States. This one is great for arrangements, for cutting, and also for drying. I really like it both pressed and used whole in dried arrangements. Bee balm or Monarda is another one that I started from seed really easily, and it has just gently spread throughout my garden. It's not something that is taking over, and it'll be easy to pull out if I have too much, but it is one that has lovely blooms, and I also use it in cut arrangements for foliage in the early spring. It is mid-April here, and it's already about 18 inches tall with just the foliage, so it's looking really nice so far already. And I already took a picture in the garden that I was touring as well of native plants next to the plant sale where their Monarda is already in full bloom. Another one that I have in my garden is called false indigo. It is really, really beautiful. It has blue flowers. It's about 3 feet tall and wide, and this is one that is commonly used in landscaping, but it just happens to also be native in my area. Next up is purple coneflowers, and I've gotten these from garden centers, but I've also started them from seed, and they are lovely. They're great forage for the birds in the winter with their seed heads. I like them dried. I like them in cut arrangements, both pressed and dried in their whole form. They are really, really nice, and I would say they're a great multi-purpose flower. They are low maintenance, but you can use them for cutting or leave them for the birds. Last up, I'm also growing milkweed, and I have gotten these from bare roots, and I've also started them from seed. These milkweed come in many different colors, and I believe the pink one is one of the ones that's native in our area. I also just have the classic orange milkweed that is great for monarch butterflies and also a host of other insects. I also use milkweed in cut arrangements. It does exude a sap, so I make sure not to get the sap on anything, and I have to be cautious if anyone is allergic to the sap. But it has worked really well for me, both for foliage when not a lot is green in kind of the heat of the summer, and then also the blooms work nicely in cut arrangements as well. Some of the plants that I noticed as I was touring the native garden in my area were wild phlox. These ones are the low-growing phlox, and they're just lovely. They look so amazing right now, especially paired with golden ragwort. there was quite a nice combination of these wild phlox and golden ragwort, and they look, wild phlox look like the same kind of phlox that people plant in their garden for landscaping, but in our area, like I said, they're native to our area. So if you're looking for a low-growing creeping phlox, if you get wild phlox, you could benefit native insects and birds and animals while also having a lovely purple show in your garden. Red buckeye is also native to our area, and it is so amazing. I love the red blooms. In fact, I was kind of caught off guard. I had never really noticed it, but it's blooming here in April, and it was in kind of a shade area of the garden that I toured, but it looked really, really stunning, and you wouldn't know that it was even native to our area. I think there's kind of a common misconception that native plants are weeds, or they look kind of scraggly, they're on the side of the highway, but many plants that are used in landscaping are taken from natives and just grown to produce the kind of traits that the grower is interested in. So whether they're compact, whether they have a certain fall color, that kind of thing. But the original plant has a home somewhere, like I said, and oftentimes they're really gorgeous as well. Next up is the white fringe tree. This one I was just really interested in. I've never really noticed them before. I knew that we had white dogwoods that were native in our area, but the white fringe tree is just very showy, kind of unassuming, but I really loved the white airy blooms. And then I also noticed underneath one of those was some Amsonia, which is also equally beautiful. That one is more of a shrub, and it has a great blue color that is unusual. I hope that this video gave you some ideas for native plants that you could grow that are common to your area. If you are not in Northwest Arkansas, there are still plants that are native to your area that will grow really well. And remember, they're often less maintenance, less water, and less difficult to grow than plants that you're bringing in from other locations because your area is their natural home. While your whole garden doesn't have to be native plants to be beneficial, it might help to add a few here or there to boost your natural insect and wildlife population.